It is good to be with you this evening. It's good to be here in Bremen. It's good to see each and every one of you, and you are an encouragement to me by your presence here. And I just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for last week and being very accommodating. And the things that you did didn't go unnoticed. And we just appreciate you and letting us use your facilities here. And I know you had Vacation Bible School going on, but I just want to say thank you. And it was a tough situation, and you really came through for us, and we really appreciate it. But Colossians chapter 3, I will be looking at Colossians chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, and I'll be addressing in verse 5 about putting away the sin of the world. But I want to begin in verse 1. He says, If ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth at the right hand of God. Set your affections on things above, not on things on this earth. For ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall ye also appear with him in glory. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil desires, and covetousness, which is idolatry. For which things' sake the wrath of God cometh upon the children of disobedience, in the which ye also walked some time when ye lived in them. But now ye put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. Let lie not one to another, seeing that ye have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. In chapters 1 and 2 of Colossians, Paul maintains here that Christ is all-sufficient in all matters of salvation and in matters of overcoming sin. And he talks in chapter 3 right here that Paul gives the basic and the practical admonition that pertains to living a life in Christ. A very basic, a very easy thing that he lays out right here, and he tells you, this is what I want you to do, and then he comes down and he says, this is what I don't want you to do. This is what I want you to think about, and then he comes down and he says, this is what I don't want you to think about. And so here, when carried these things out, this will assure us that we can find everything in Christ that we need to live a life that is dedicated to Christ. But he talks about verse 1. He says, if ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above. I want you to dwell upon those things that are above. Why? Because we as Christians want to be transformed. As Romans chapter 12 and verse 2 says, be ye not then conformed to the pattern of this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and perfect and acceptable will of God. I don't want you to be a conformer, but he comes across and he says, I want you to be a transformer. How? By the renewing of your mind. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, he says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things of our good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, what does he say? Think on these things. Let your mind dwell upon these things. If you want to live a life like Christ, then dwell upon those things that are good. Feed your mind with those things that are pure and lovely and good and are honest and are just. And he says, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. Think on these things. But we died. In Romans chapter 6, he talks about our death. Romans chapter 6, beginning in verse 3. Know ye not that so many of us were baptized into Christ, were baptized into his death? Verse 4. Therefore, we are buried with him in baptism, where? Into death. That like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we should walk in a newness of life. For if we've been planted together in the likeness of his death, we shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. Knowing this, that our old man is what? Crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. Why are we going to set our mind on these things? Because we have died to sin. Sin no longer has dominion over us. Sin no longer reigns over us. Who reigns over us? That's King Jesus. Not sin. We've crucified that. When we were baptized into Christ, we were buried with him. Then we were raised to walk how? Walk in a newness of life. In Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20, Paul says, I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me. And the life which I now live by the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I've crucified myself, Paul says. It's no longer I who live, but it's Christ who lives in me. I let Christ direct my path. I let Christ direct my walk. I let Christ direct my life. He is on the throne ruling in my life. I'm crucified with Christ. But then he goes on in Colossians chapter 3, and he says here in verse 5, he starts and he says, I want you to seek those things that are above. He comes down in verse 5 and he says, therefore mortify, the members which are upon the earth. What are they? Fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil desires, and covetousness, which is idolatry. And he says here in verse 7, in which ye also walked sometime when you lived in them. He says at one time, this is what you were. This is how you lived. He says, but now you're living with Christ. And then he comes down in verse 8 and he says, but I want you to also put off these. What are these, Paul? Anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, and the filthy communication that proceeds out of your mouth. These things what you once were. These things are the things that you once did. This is how you once lived. He says, but now you don't walk in those things anymore. Why? Because you've set your mind on things above. You're thinking on things that are honest, pure, lovely, just, any virtue, any praise. Set your mind on those things. Therefore, those things over here, these things over here, they don't have dominion over me. That's not who I am. But in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15 to 17, he categorizes all this, and all of it can be categorized in one of three things. He says in 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, he says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. and the world passeth away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God shall abide forever. Love not the world. We can't be in love with Christ and then come over here and be in love with the world. It doesn't work. This world is messed up. This world has no care about God. I was listening to one man who gave it his account of a time that he went fishing. And he went fishing and the game warden stopped him. And he asked him if he could see his license. And so he pulls out his fishing license and he hands it to the game warden. And he said, well, everything checks out, but why do you have that pistol by your side? And he says, well, I often come down here to fish, and every time I come down here to fish, it seems like I run across a copperhead. And he says, I just shoot them because I'm afraid they're going to bite me. And the game warden looked at him and said, well, mister, don't you know that in the state of Arkansas, it is absolutely illegal to shoot a snake? And he got to thinking, you know what? It's illegal to shoot a snake. This is how backward our world is. It's illegal to shoot a snake, but we can go down to our nearest abortion clinic and kill a human life. Does that make the least bit of sense? That we can kill human life before we can come across and kill a snake. There are more laws for a snake than there are for a human innocent life. That's our world. That's our world. But I love what he says right here. In verse 5. He comes down and he says, and the last thing he says, and mortify therefore covetousness, which is idolatry. Idolatry. We don't think of covetousness as being an idol to us. But what the point is getting across is anything that we put before God becomes therefore our idol. Anything that you put before God becomes your idol. That's the thing that you love. That's the thing that you worship. Too many times we're just like the banker who worked his way up until he became the vice president of this prestigious bank. And on his way home one night, he was driving in his Jaguar. And it was raining, it was cold, there was a little bit of ice on the road. And his Jaguar slipped off the road, smacked into a tree, and in the process, he lost his left arm. Well, this truck saw what happened. He came up behind him, pulls the man out of the car, and the whole time the banker's sitting there saying, my Jaguar, I've lost my Jaguar. He said, well, mister, your arm, what about your arm? You just lost your arm. He looked down to where his arm used to be, and he said, my Rolex, I've lost my Rolex. You see, we can get so caught up in this world, so caught up in the things of this world, so in love with the things of this world, that we worry about what's important instead of those things that are necessary. Necessary. But in order to set our mind on things above, in order to mortify, therefore, the members which are upon the earth, I believe first and foremost, we have to take care of the home. I believe the devil is at work within the home. When we are living in a time where 53 or 54% of all marriages end in divorce, when we are living in a time where it says that 50% of our children are growing up in a home that is without a father. Brethren, there is something seriously wrong with today's home. And the devil will attack us worse in the home. And when it affects the home, then it creeps in and it affects the church. But we need some men who will step up and be men within the home. We don't need our men to take on the lesser role in the home. We don't need our men to let our wives be the spiritual leaders of the home. Too many times we're sitting there watching them walk out the door to go to the service of the church instead of leading them out the door. We need some godly men who want to serve God and who want to be a light unto their family and lead their family on the road to heaven. Society tells us that real men don't cry. Real men, they don't weep. But in 1 Samuel chapter 30, you're going to see David and his mighty men. 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 1. First Samuel chapter 30, verse 1. And it came to pass, when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and Ziklag had smitten Ziklag, and burned it with fire, and had taken the women captive, and that were therein. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away and went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire. Their daughters, their wives, their sons, and their daughters were taken captives. Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep. It says that when they came back to Ziklag, that they saw their houses burned to the ground. They saw their wives being taken captive. They saw their sons being taken captive. They saw their daughters being taken captive. And what did they do? It says they fell and they cried until they could not cry anymore. Maybe today we don't have the Amalekites chasing us. But we have a much worse enemy that is trying to destroy our family. Now these men right here in 1 Samuel chapter 30, these weren't sissy men. These weren't girly men. These weren't wimpy men. These weren't Brokeback Mountain men. These were men. And what's wrong with our nation today? When the Academy Award-winning film is about two cowboys running around in the woods together being gay. What's wrong with our society today? Because our devil, he wants to feminize men. The devil wants to have our men have jellyfish backbones. He doesn't want you to stand for anything. He doesn't want you to care about anything spiritual. He don't want you to set your mind on earthly things. He doesn't want to mortify the sin that's within you. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about you. He just wants you to sit out in your home, sit on your lazy boy, flip your flipper, and let your mind vegetate on ESPN while your family is on the road to hell. He doesn't care about you. But the devil's strong. And Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. Listen to what he says. when I was a child. I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away those childish things. Now I want you to notice here that there are two whens. When I was a child and when I became a man. Because there's a time in our life where we need to get out of childhood and we need to move on to adulthood. Too many of us are still stuck in spiritual childhood. Each year we need to be growing. We need to be developing. We need to be maturing. We need to have a greater faith, a deeper dedication, a deeper commitment. And yet we're still not growing. We're staying stagnant and we're still stuck in spiritual childhood. Our children should see their daddies being leaders. Leaders within the home. Leaders within the church. And we're still debating whether or not we're even going to go to the services of the church. But when we were children, we could act like children. We could think like children. We could understand like a child. But when we became adults, we need to start acting like adults, thinking like adults, speaking like adults, understanding like adults. And we need to put away our childish, selfish ways. Michaela, my 3-year-old daughter, she loves dolls. Loves them. You see Michaela and you're almost certain to see a doll baby in her hand. I saw her the other day spanking one of them. I said, "What did it do?" She said, "She's going to time out." I said, "Well, what'd she do?" She was being ugly to me. She loves dolls. Loves them. She can love dolls at 3 years old. She could sit in the back of the car and play with her dolls, talk to her dolls, comb her doll's hair. But if she's 19 or 20, still sitting in the back seat of our car, saying, "Hey, baby, hey," I'm going to be thinking, "Michaela, let's go get you some help." Why? Because there's a time that you can act like a child. When you can think and understand and speak like a child, but there is a time when a person has to grow up and start acting like an adult. In Kruger National Park, there was an overflow of elephants. And so they took about 300 of the smallest and youngest elephants, and they transferred them and they put them in this other park. And what they were noticing is that these rhinos were turning up dead. And they thought, what in the world is going on? Rhinos, they have no predators. Nobody's dumb enough to mess with a rhino. But you see, what they were finding out is that these 300 smaller elephants were forming packs. They were forming gangs. And they were going around killing rhinos because they did not have the older and mature and the bigger elephant there to teach them and to train them and develop them, and they were doing those things that were unnatural to an elephant. Why? Because they had no role model there. No one to mentor them, teach them, train them what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior. And so what did they do? They were doing those things that were not even conscionable or were not even right for an elephant. And I believe that we, in our society, because of our 50% of our homes are fatherless, and since there is no one there to train our young men, to mentor our young men, to teach our young men what is acceptable and what is not, they're doing those things that are unnatural. And I believe here in Colossians chapter 3, he says, I want you to put off all of these. I want you to set your mind on those things that are above. I want you to mortify, therefore, the members which are upon the earth: fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil desires, and covetousness. What is that? The lust of the flesh. And then when you come down to covetousness, it starts with the lust of the eyes. In every way, the devil's going to come to us in a threefold temptation: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. He came to Adam and Eve that way. Look how he came to Adam and Eve. The tree was pleasant to look upon. What's that? The lust of the eyes. The tree was good for food. What was that? The lust of the flesh. And the tree was desirable to make one wise. What did she want to do? She wanted to be as wise as God was. What is that? The pride of life. And then he goes and he tempts Jesus in the garden, or in the wilderness in Matthew chapter 4. He said, turn these stones into bread. What is that? The lust of the flesh. He takes him up to the pinnacle of the temple and a high mountain, and he says, look at all these things I'm going to give you if you'll fall down and worship me. What is that? The lust of the eyes. And then he takes him up to the pinnacle of the temple, and he says, I want you to throw yourself down, lest your angels come and lift you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. What is that? The pride of life. In every way that we are tempted today, it's going to come in one of three ways: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. That's it. But God has made men and women very different. You say, well, duh. God's made us very different. And He wants us to take upon ourselves the God-given biblical role that a man is to take upon himself and the woman is to take upon herself. But He's made us very different. Even if you look into the medical world, you will see that God has made us very different. Men have the XY chromosome. Women have an XX chromosome. Men have 10 million sperm. Women have one egg. They ask, well, why does it take so many? One woman said, because they won't stop and ask for directions. She's better. She has a better immune system, females do, than males. Why? Because her XX chromosomes are lined up. They found out in concentration camps in World War II that women lived longer and fared much better than men did, because their immune systems were so much stronger. If I'm sick, everybody's going to know about it. I'll be sick as a dog. Everybody's going to know about it. Alicia will come home and she'll do all the things that she's done all day, and then she'll say, I haven't felt good all day long. Women deteriorate 2% every 10 years. Men deteriorate 10% every 10 years. Men have 1.5 gallons of blood flowing through their body. Women only have 4/5 of a gallon of blood flowing through their body. That's why men are stronger than women. That's why we can beat you at arm wrestling. But what is interesting is how our brain is wired. How our brain is wired. Men, our brain is wired. We have this chemical known as testosterone. And a couple of days after birth, this chemical is released in our brain that destroys the fibers between our left side of our brain and the right side of our brain. Y'all say, well, I knew y'all had brain damage. But it destroys those fibers and it causes us to be lateral in our thinking. We can only think with one side of the brain at a time. Women have radar. We'll be sitting in there eating dinner. Alicia will be eating, tending to the children, carrying on a conversation with me, and she'll say, did you hear what they said over there at that table? I'm like, how do you comprehend all that? How do you have a conversation with me, take care of the children, eat your dinner, and listen to their conversation over there? Why? Because they have radar. They can do a million things at once where we're like, A plus B equals C. But the left side is what we think the most with. That's our conquering side. Our goal-oriented side, our hunter side, challenge, our objective side. We think a lot more on the left side of our brain than what we do on the right. The right side is the emotional side. That's the nurturing side. That's where our feelings are. We think over here, the goal-oriented, the challenge-oriented, much more than we think over here on this side of the brain, and that's our feeling side. And so when we go on a trip, men do not take a trip. Men conquer a trip. We don't take a trip, we conquer a trip. Our children are yelling in the back seat, Daddy, I gotta go to the bathroom. What do we say? No, we got 400 miles to go and we're already 10 minutes behind. Why? Because we are not taking a trip, we are conquering a trip. That's the hunter mentality in us. When we go to the mall, it's the same thing. Alicia will say, let's pick out a dress. I need a dress. I need a black dress. So we'll go into the store and I'll say, there's one, get it, let's go. She'll say, no, I just want to keep looking. And so she'll get all these dresses. She'll go back into the dressing room. And after an hour being in that store, she finally comes out. And I'll say, which one are you going to get? And this is what kills us. She'll say, I don't want any of them. I'll say, you're killing me. We're hunters. We go in, there it is, get it, buy it, let's go. But we drive from the left side of our brain. This is the side that we think the most with. We drive from this side of the brain. That's why men are better drivers than women. One man said, if you don't like the way my wife drives, stay off the sidewalk. But here's the point. That God has made us very different. And what He needs now more than ever is the men and women to stand up and to take upon them the God-given role of being the man of the home and being the woman of the house and to leading our children in the way that they should go. To set our mind on those things that are above, not on those things that are on this earth. We are so consumed with the pleasures of this world, with the things of this world, with the things of this life. We're so busy and so consumed about getting bigger houses and better cars and fattening our bank accounts that we worry about all these things that are important, but then we neglect those things that are absolutely necessary, and that is living a life for Christ. Comes down. He says, I want you, in verse 8, to put off anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy. Eat filthy communication out of your mouth. Lie not one to another. He says, seeing then that you have put off the old man. We put him off. We've crucified the old man. That's not who we were, or that's not who we are. That's who we were, but that is not who we are. But he says in verse 10, and now, and have put on the new man. We stripped off the old man. We don't serve that old man anymore. We don't serve self anymore. We don't live after the flesh anymore. But he says, now you put on the new man. The new man that is in Christ. And he goes on, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision or uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. We are complete in Christ. There is neither Greek nor Jew, black or white, male or female. What does he say? Barbarian or Scythian. What does he say? But you are all one. Christ is all and in all. This is the life that we live. But it all hinges on the very first verse in chapter 3. When he says, if ye then been risen with Christ, seek those things which are above. He's already assuming that they've been raised with Christ. That they belong to Christ. And he says, if you've been risen with Christ, seek those things which are above. Look in verse 12 of chapter 2 of Colossians. Buried with him in baptism, wherein also ye are, what? Risen with him. Through the faith of the operation of God, who hath raised him from the dead. How are we raised with Christ? We are raised with him through baptism. People say, oh, baptism, that's not essential. Oh, baptism, they try to downplay it. Oh, y'all believe that water saves you. I don't believe that water saves me. I believe that God saves me. And if God tells me to get in the water and be baptized for the remission of my sins, guess what? I'm going to get in the water and be baptized for the remission of my sins. There's nothing great about this water. That's just water. The greatness is in God. There's no salvation in this water. Salvation is in God. And God tells me to get into the water and be baptized for the remission of my sins. Guess what? I'm going to be obedient to God. But we are striving as brothers and sisters in Christ to live godly in a very ungodly world. But he leaves it here. Set your mind on things above. He comes down, he says, mortify therefore the members that are upon the earth. Get rid of these things. Anything that will hinder your walk with God, with your relationship with God, he says, get it out. Get that sin out. And set your mind on things above. Again, I want to thank you. I appreciate the invitation. I always enjoy coming and seeing each and every one of you. And I'll keep you in my prayers. You keep me and Tallapoosa in your prayers. And we will work together as we spread the border of God's kingdom. Thank you.